everybody. You're listening to the Comic Book Bears podcast. I'm Billy Z.
And I'm Steve Morey.
And we are back with you tonight, and we're going to be talking about one thing, which is two things, and that's what I have been referring to as HOXPOX, which appears to really annoy Steve. It's more commonly known as House of X Powers of 10. It's the current dual Marvel limited series that are one story written by Jonathan Hickman with various artists on the books. And it's probably the biggest comic event happening right now. We've had a couple of issues that have been seismic in terms of their implications, and we're going to talk about them. Now, I have to ask you, Steve, you read a lot more X-Men books than I have in recent times.
Yeah. In fact, that's pretty much the only Marvel thing I've been reading over the past almost 10 years.
Well, no. You've talked about other stuff.
There has been some other things, like a few things here and there. Like, I do still read Runaways. I mean, that's a big one. But the majority of what I read from Marvel is X-Men. So I've been there through all of the the all new X-Men, the Bendis era when he redid everything about right after AVX. I've been reading X-Men since AVX consistently. So yeah, seen it all.
For me, I was someone who got back in with AVX, and I stuck with All New and Uncanny until about the 75% mark, I would say. Picked up marquee issues like the 500 or whatever number the Uncanny hit. I always forget.
600.
600. But I have most of them. I've just been filling in the numbers since with digital sales. And there's been a few books that I've picked up here and there, Cable and X-Force, some titles here and there, certainly seen as Iceman. I picked up Major X out of sentimentality. I do have to thank you, Steve, because you gave me all the codes for Age of X. Which at some point I will have a nice binge. And I spread the love with our friend Caleb, and he has all my Major X codes. So a lot of X love being spread around our little orbit here. But I am somebody that has dropped off pretty much.
Yeah.
One thing that I really liked is when you read these books, it doesn't matter. I didn't need to know what Jean Grey's total arc was since AVX. I just knew that there was a Jean Grey there, and she's currently Marvel Girl. Basically same thing with Cyclops. So I like that element about it of a restart, but I still have some questions. Like I said many times in the show, I really can't read most X-Men books without Wikipedia handy. And, I think anybody who is diving into something with a huge legacy where you don't have the benefit of the entire experience, I have that with JSA. I have that with JLA. I have it to some extent with Legion. I have it with Titans. I think the closest thing I might have it in Marvel is Avengers. I'm not sure. That aside, we're going to be going through each of the 5 books that have been released so far, almost at the halfway point. And, Steve, I'm just going to throw it over to you and tell us all about, well, I'll interject too, but why don't you start talking about House of X #1, which was the first book released.
So before I start talking about that, real briefly, like you mentioned, sort of sticking with it since AVX, kind of like with me, and, having to have a Wikipedia page open when reading X-Men. And I think a lot of that is the fact that they've essentially had a singular continuity. Regardless of how messy that continuity has been over the past 50 years, it's been pretty consistent. There haven't been true reboots like some other, to the extent that like DC does with their crises.
Right. I think there've been more tonal reboots.
Yeah, I mean, and that's pretty much what it is. Like you have different writers who kind of have their preferences, their favorite characters, and so they build a team based around that, and they kind of write stories that more or less pertain to the characters on that team, like the different specific heroes. And so, you might have a couple years where it's very Cyclops and Emma Frost centric, or Magneto centric, or Charles Xavier and Wolverine centric. Like, there's very much It's very much based around these, some of these central figures, and then of course, they have the satellite characters that come off of that.
And sometimes some of those satellite characters dictate some of the direction, like Hope.
Exactly. Yeah. Sometimes Hope is especially an interesting character because she was supposed to be a catalyst. She was supposed to be kind of the restart of of mutants and the the Messiah, more or less, for the mutants when she was introduced. And this is kind of one of those biggest issues that X-Men have had over the past, especially I'd say since the Claremont era, is that there's a lot of big ideas, a lot of characters that come in and they're there to shake up the status quo completely and just, get things moving into a whole new direction. Whoever's writing that or whoever is sort of like leading the editorial staff into a new direction with these, these centralized characters, or these, super teams. And then it just kind of peters out when they move on.
Mm-hmm.
So, unlike having, something as solid to look to as the Claremont era.
It's funny, though, when you mention the Claremont era, if you go back to the Claremont era, there's a lot of subplots that are never tied up. So I think in some ways this has been a continuum.
Yeah, and it's you're right there. I mean, with Claremont himself, I mean, his basically his writing style, and the way that he sort of built up the X-Men mythos. There is a lot of rose-colored glasses when looking back to, the 80s and early 90s, but at the same time, he did have a very consistent voice, and that's pretty much, for a lot of longtime readers, that's kind of their, X-Men. And the character beats and the, who these characters are really was kind of solidified during that era. Problematically, though, you get a lot of big personalities that write, either the flagship title or or they restart the title. So you have some really great names who've worked on it, like Morrison. Bendis was the last big name, probably, who worked with X-Men. And because of that, you have so many additional loose ends that are thrown in there. Character origins, I guess they have some tendency to be retconned, but a lot of times they don't. Mm-hmm. So a lot of stuff gets kind of thrown into the blender, and timelines don't really make sense a lot of times, and they don't try to explain them. It's almost like trying to explain why the Fantastic Four are always, even are always the same age in the same era, but do a lot with politicians at the time, or certain technologies that never seem to really go past that. Now, of course, Fantastic Four is another issue. They've had a lot of time retcons as well. Mm-hmm. But with the X-Men, because there's so many different characters and there's so many different iterations of them, it's easy for readers to kind of forget how time works with these characters. Like you could just pretty much go and say, okay, well, this team is an era, and this team is an era, and this team is an era, and yes, they have some members that kind of mix and match, but it's very distinct, and it's okay that we don't really know what's been going on with Nightcrawler for about 5 years, or these New Mutants have disappeared for a time and now they're back, and it's fine. They're still kind of picking up where they left off. Hickman decided, and I'm not really sure exactly what his original process was when he approached Marvel about taking over the X-Men, but he more or less decided that sure, that's all good and nice and all, but you know what, I kind of want to do my own thing completely from the ground up. And House of X #1 really hit that home in a way that Powers of 10 kind of follows up on very well. And with this 1-2 punch, and I'm just looking at House of X #1 right now, this is, Hickman, of course, writing it. The main artist was Pepe Larraz, with colors by Marta Gracia. And of course a lot of design, which is a very Hickman thing to do, by Tom Mueller in this case. He really created this whole new thing. And I just think immediately off the bat, you have these beautifully constructed pages that hint at, the direction that he's going to be taking this book and the look of this book and Powers. The new alphabet that he's created, the infographic pages that he sprinkles throughout the issue. All of these are helping create the new understanding of this world of X-Men for these readers. Because most people who are reading it aren't coming to X-Men for the first time when they're picking up House of X or Powers of 10. They're probably longtime readers, or at least have been reading it for a little while, and know these characters, even from the cartoons, from the movies, but they're getting something new with all of these characters. We see it quietly start off on the first page with Professor X, and really kind of beautiful 2-page, interestingly designed set of panels where you get this vast sort of organic structure, and there's someone who kind of looks like the Maker, with a big X, sort of awakening people hatching out of pods. And of course, the quiet line that's immediately recognizable as Charles Xavier, "To me, my X-Men." Very strange. We're not really sure what's going on. Are these clones? Are these reborn X-Men? What's happening with this? He puts his hand on somebody whose eyes sort of light up in a way that Cyclops might, before his powers fully formed. It's a striking image, and really a great image to throw out there to let the reader know Hickman's doing something completely different. These are not the X-Men that you've been reading for the past 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And then, of course, the story itself sets up that these X-Men, which looks to be a pretty big partnership between Magneto, various heroes. You've got Jean Grey in her original Marvel Girl costume appearing. Cypher is alive.
Quick correction there, son. That's the second Marvel Girl
Second
costume.
one, not the one that she had in the first couple issues of X-Men.
Bronze Age boy can tell you that.
Yeah. This is the one where they started having like their own unique looks. Yeah. So this is green skirt, weird spiky eye mask thing.
Easy cosplay Jean Grey.
Yes, easy cosplay Jean Grey. Perfect. If you have a green mini dress, you're good. These characters are kind of appearing in a way that maybe we haven't seen for a very long time. But then again, you've got Magneto in sort of normal Magneto garb, except it's now silver white. You've got the Cuckoos are showing up, also in sort of like an X patterned outfit. You've got Wolverine in his, in his sort of like brown and browner costume from the 80s and from the early 90s. Before he got that cool, like the cool redo of the yellow blue, but he sometimes goes back to the brown every once in a while. So it's just an interesting throwback. The images of the characters notwithstanding, they seem to be acting in ways that you wouldn't normally expect. Magneto, of course, is just being Magneto, just kind of imposing and whatnot. In the storyline here in the first issue, he's meeting with a bunch of presumed ambassadors to talk to them about the plans of the new mutant nation built in Krakoa. And, he tells them about medicines that are being produced, different vitamins or different supplements that can help, prolong humans' lives and end mental illness and end certain diseases that Krakoa can produce with their flowers. We also get information about other Krakoa flowers that create doorways and portals to the island and to other places around the world where they've set up sort of embassies of a type. These gateways and these buildings that people can go into and then go straight to Krakoa from there. Very interesting. But with all the information, what he's throwing together here is sort of setting up this idea that the mutants have all banded together, or more or less have all come together to create this island nation to show that they are separate from the rest of the nations of the world. And they really try to hammer this out very clearly to the ambassadors, some of whom are not actually ambassadors, but intelligence agents, to let them know it's they're not to be trifled with. They're not going to try to appease humanity or work within humanity. They are separate. They are a separate nation. And they not just want a place at the table, but they want to assert their superpower status. Superpower in the political sense. It's contrasted in this first story with a group of humans who are heading off to the sun, where they've set up a huge space station that's centered around the head of a giant sentinel master mold. And interestingly enough, within this, the humans are actually a patchwork of different scientists and thinkers and engineers from various agencies across the planet. So you have S.H.I.E.L.D., you've got S.W.O.R.D., you've even got AIM, you've got Hydra represented here.
And most shockingly, Alpha Flight.
And Alpha Flight, exactly. So you've got a lot of these supranational agencies that have members here that are part of this group called Orcus. And they're there basically because they've decided that the actions of the mutants in creating this independent nation and, the overtures that they're making on the world stage are showing that this is it. This is the start of the end game. This is the start of the extinction of Homo sapiens and the ascendancy of Homo sapiens superior. So they're basically saying it's inevitable. At this point, it's a complete slide into the end of humanity as normal humans. And so they're setting this up as a way to create a new outpost of humanity, or more likely, of course, to create a new base from which to attack the mutants who are now more or less poised to take over Earth, or will eventually take over Earth because it's inevitable. And who they have helping them is a character called Karima, and Bill, I don't know if you might recall this, but there was a character who was introduced in X-Men Red, who had the ability to speak with machines and converted a Sentinel to fight with them, and I can't remember the character's name. But this Karima kind of reminds me very much of her, except a hard-ass shaved head version. So I'm not really sure if there's a connection. I'm not sure if this is a wholly, completely new character, or if this is possibly somebody that Hickman may have dug up from somewhere in the thousands of pages of X-Men history.
It appears that there was a character named Karima Shapandar,
Mm-hmm.
who was introduced in X-Men Unlimited Volume 1, number 27, was created by Chris Claremont and Brett Booth. She was a police officer from India who transformed into an Omega Prime Sentinel by Bastion of the Operation Zero Tolerance program.
Interesting. So this might be that Karima.
You're right. She later joined the X-Men when they discovered a disassembled Karima along with Lady Mastermind, but she appeared to have lost her memory at the time she got disassembled. Rogue officially recruited her onto the team to help fight the Children of the Vault, part of Messiah Complex. Yeah, it looks like there's some pretty substantial involvement through the years there with at least that character as written here.
So this could very well be that same Karima. Probably is. I mean, given Hickman, he likes pulling out those characters that are semi-obscure and giving them a new role. So this might be essentially that.
I think my favorite application of that was in Fantastic Four and FF, where you had characters like Dragon Man and Alex Power, who you had not seen in years.
Oh, yeah.
And had pretty vital roles.
And that's why I actually really did love FF because of that, because it was such a mishmash of these odd characters and, related children thrown together.
And now that I'm thinking about it, look at all the stuff he threw into the pot with Avengers. With characters from the New Universe and Hyperion. It was a lot he threw in the soup there.
Which is true. I mean, with Hickman, you're going to get a lot of
with
deep
X-Men,
cuts.
do you have ingredients?
Yeah. Somebody threw out a number once. The number of X-Men that have either been like full-time X-Men, appeared in an issue, were tangentially related or introduced as part of the Morlocks or the Brotherhood, or just like rando mutant, of issue 73 kind of thing, that the numbers almost in the thousands.
I believe it.
So it could just be, we're talking like background mutants kind of thing. We're not talking about like 1,000 main characters that have had like a full storyline. But I mean, if you think of all the teams that they fought over the years, and the various Morlock groups, and the various classes of X-Men with mutant kids who never caught on or only appeared in the background of issues, things like that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of potential there.
So what did you like most about this issue?
So what I liked about this is that this is an issue that sets up this group of X-Men, or not even just this group of X-Men, but this entire setting as essentially without mercy. Hickman is basically coming in saying, this is the way the X-Men are right now. They're all kind of working towards this goal. They are separate from humanity. They're not trying to be understood or trying to protect them. They are all about themselves right now.
Right. I think that ties in with one of the things that I liked, probably the thing I liked the most about this issue was the economy of how he set that up. They were basically very simple, concise statements that you worked from.
I mean, it's pure exposition. Like this entire issue just reads as, let me tell you what is going on in the world right now. And with the design pages that kind of lay out sort of infographics and facts, that it's the same thing. It's just like, okay, this is the state of the world right now. Here are some characters that we're going to be following. Here are some names that we want, that you might recognize.
We have a lot of issues to cover, so
okay. So let's move on to.
I'm going to wrap up a little bit, but we're not doing that till I tell you what I liked.
Okay, fine.
All right. The fanboy stuff. One thing I really liked, the only connection that we've seen in these 5 issues to the rest of the Marvel Universe has been the Fantastic Four confronting Sabretooth and Mystique and Blob, who have broken into a danger control facility. And it sets up a confrontation between Cyclops and the Fantastic Four. There is this notion of amnesty for all mutants in Krakoa at this point. Cyclops presents that concept. Fantastic Four aren't really cool with it. And in a major change from what we've dealt with hypersensitive and stuffy Scott Summers, he just goes, you know what? Okay, you just take him. with the trap Sabretooth. I love that. I absolutely love that. Also, just in terms of not even a full panel, just part of a panel, to see Logan smiling and playing with children. It's a wonderful panel, and I want more of that. Steve, I got to say, you did a really bang-up job in illustrating the terrain that House of X #1 covers, so thank you for that.
Oh, no problem. The thing is, he sets everything up in House of X #1, what to expect, in terms of the looks of the rest of the books. They may have, a lot of different artists, but there's a consistency in how the pages are presented, the
especially the coloring.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, don't know if it's the same colorist throughout. It sure feels it. And a great prayer of mine is that we'd finally see Jonathan Hickman on a Legion of Superheroes, I mean. And with the Krakoan language and his, history as a graphic artist, in advertising and how those books are set up, those reek of Giffen and Levitt's Legion. And oh my God, I would just love to see that. You can just see the affection for that. And there's also a correlation. One of our fellow podcasts, Word Balloon, with John Suntress, always makes the point of, for a lot of kids in the 80s, there was a point where you either open the X-Men door or you open the Legion door. And that doesn't come without some connective tissue. God, I'd love to see Hickman on Legion, but we don't have that right now. We have him on X-Men. So let's go over to Powers of 10 #1.
So Powers of 10 #1, it's interesting with this. And the one thing that I'm also grateful for is that Hickman is nothing if not instructive in how he wants his books read. Because at the end of each issue, he actually lists the order in which you're supposed to read these issues. It's nice, hopefully. So far, we're just about halfway in. So far, the publishing and shipping schedule has kept to the schedule that's in this book. That's in that timeline. So as long as it continues,
The rumor is the entire series was completed by late April.
that would be great.
Yeah.
If that's true. And so far, I mean, it feels like they are on track. And it's good too because it also is not a, for 1 week is House, next week is Powers, next week is House, next week is Powers. Sometimes it'll be
the schedule. Yeah.
Yeah, it might be House, Powers, House, Powers, Powers, House, House, Powers, House, House, Powers, Powers. It might do that. And it looks like, well, that's exactly what it's doing. Anyway, so Powers came out the second week, Powers #1, and this one automatically, and again, there are a million covers for these. There's lots of variants. If you're going with the standard cover on it, it's striking. In fact, it's striking in that it's almost unrecognizable. None of these characters are characters we may have seen before, with the exception of course, Charles Xavier and what we find out is Moira McTaggart.
And Nimrod.
And Nimrod, true. But Nimrod's had kind of... actually, it is pretty recognizable to him. It's a slightly different design, but yeah, it's Nimrod. But, front and center is a character who's got what looks like liquid metal skin and Illyana's limbo sword, or her soul sword, just looking all kind of crazy and badass, and you're like, who is that? Is she some kind of, is she somebody's kid? Why does she have the sword? What's going on? You've got what looks like a red Nightcrawler, but not Azazel. You've got a couple other characters that are interesting and unique, and you also do have Karima, as she appeared, or more or less as she appeared in House of X #1 in the corner, and then of course another figure in the background who could be anybody, until you go to start reading it. And this book sets up the other plan that Hickman has for the series, and that is time. Because in the first book, it sets up the setting, it sets the feel. This one sets up how he's going to screw all that up by playing with time. And that's made very clear on page 1 when he has the different eras that he's going to be operating in. X0, or X to the null power, is year 1, the Dream, X-Men. The next one is X to the first power, the X-Men, year 10, the World. Next one, X to the second power, the X-Men, year 100 of the War, and of course the image there is Nimrod. And then the third one is X to the third power, the X-Men, year 1000 Ascension. So these are the eras that he's operating in. And looking back on this page, this is one of the things too. This is the series where you go back and you look at previous issues to kind of see the clues that he expands on in later issues. So seeing that laid out after having read Powers #3, it makes an interesting. It changes things a little bit. It changes a little bit how I feel about it. So, but he starts off right away by showing some kind of, probably set in the past. You have a younger Charles Xavier who has full use of his legs. You have a young Moira McTaggart looking pretty mod, and she strikes up a conversation with him at some county fair or some circus in town. And through that conversation and a really beautifully framed back and forth set of panels where you see Charles's face and Moira's face and Charles' face and Moira's face and then Charles' face again, as she basically just tells him, like, I know who you are, Charles. You don't know me yet, but just read my mind and you'll see everything. And then the book starts and it jumps forward into the year 10 years into the future, picking up where we left off in House of X #1. And then after that, it pushes again into 100 years in the future, and you see the conflict between the mutants of that era and the man-machine alliance, which looks to be a little bit more machine and more Sentinel run than man. Introducing some of these new characters. The one who we saw on the cover, who's front and center, is Rasputin, who we find out is a chimera whose combined DNA comes from, who would you expect, Colossus and magic and I believe, who else was in there? I think it's like Jean Grey. There's a few other ones that are mixed in with her.
Yeah, you can look in the books to find the.
They have the breakdown of all the different characters, which is pretty cool. They introduce a couple other characters because they're trying to break into Nimrod's complex to steal something, and a few of these other characters get killed off or captured. It's really exciting, and this is the first time that we're actually seeing. I mean, other than the brief scuffle with the Fantastic Four, we're actually seeing some action here, which is brought to us very nicely by the artist in this issue, who is, because I forgot to mention that, is R.B. Silva, as well as Adriana De Benedetto, who's also helping out with the inks. And again, I think you asked about it. Marte Gracia has been doing the colors for all these issues. So she's who we have to thank for the beautiful and consistent palette of colors that we have here.
Thank you. Future Eisner winner.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Gosh, it's great. But again, with this, we have a lot of infographics. We have a listing of the history of what's happening in year 100 with the history of the sinister mutant breeding program and cloning process. We find out that 100 years in the future, most of the mutants have been basically are clones or, chimeras who have been created or have been bred by the machines in their kennels to hunt down other fellow mutants. So it's really a very bleak future that we're being shown here, and it's we have a lot of conversation between Nimrod and Karima, who, of course, is still around and much more machine than human at this point. And then, of course, we get to see what's going on in Krakoa, or what's left of Krakoa, and are introduced to X-Men who may be familiar. There's definitely a Wolverine, there's Magneto, there's what looks to be sort of a future version of Zorn, and then a large tree person. And I remember... you can tell that a book has generated enough readership and excitement when you have so many speculative posts about who that fourth one is. I heard Black Tom. I heard, it was Black Tom. There was somebody else too. Groot. People thought it might have been some sort of like mutant version of Groot.
The most interesting one I came across was a child of Man-Thing and a mutant.
Yeah. It was great, and actually seeing a lot of that speculation on the boards that, both of us go on to, and also in, various articles across Bleeding Cool and CBR and Newsarama. Like, there's a lot of that speculation, and that just means, to me, that, one, there's a ton of people reading this book and reading this series, but also that there's enough excitement and interest that Hickman's actually doing something that's encouraging people to talk about the book, to, come up with theories and to have fun, trying to see who's right and who's wrong. And what's really great is that pretty much everybody was completely wrong on this one. I don't think I heard the right one until, and of course it was just revealed, I think last week. So, it's really funny, that we actually got to have that kind of thing. And I think every week, I know in my LCS, we've been discussing it. The people who've been reading this are always sort of saying, "Oh, did you read the latest issue? From last week? What was your take on it? What have you been saying about it?" And I'm not sure if that's the same for everybody, but I think this is definitely one of those books that not just generates buzz, but also conversation about it. So, and then of course he does send us to round out the book into the farthest future era. And that's the year 1000, where we have a elevated being that's having a conversation with, I guess, the future version of Nimrod, who is just this little floating thing that's kind of hanging out and chatting with him. And you get to see sort of how they feel about this future era, looking back at their history and then looking down at, in this, beautiful city of the future, looking down to a small dome in which the remainders of humanity are allowed to frolic, sort of like an Adam and Eve almost, or maybe a zoo exhibit. and they're all that's left of humanity. So it's such an interesting setup here. We have the start where Charles and Moira, something's being revealed, something that Moira knows that Charles doesn't, is being shared between them. The current era where we have, what we've been reading in House of X, the 100 years in the future where obviously everything went to shit, and then 1,000 years of the future where everybody's so completely evolved past what happened in year 100 or 100 years after the start of the X-Men, that, how it's going to tie in to the rest of the series, it's hard to imagine at this point, which is great because Hickman's creating new questions. He's creating new, topics of conversation. I love that.
Well, things I liked about this, I love that there's a sense of almost widescreen action in this issue, but not one single punch is thrown.
Oh, yeah.
It's weird, but it works. I will totally second what you said about the framing sequences with Moira and Charles. I thought they were beautifully executed, and how they tied in a bow that eventually gets unraveled in the next issue. I thought was nice. And I also liked that Nimrod was kind of funny.
Yeah, he's kind of a dick.
He's a dick, but he throws some zingers out there.
Oh, yeah.
It's a lot like the second season of Young Justice with Black Beetle. Was by far the funniest character, but yet the most evil. But you couldn't help laughing because he's got some good lines. I can't wait to talk about the next issue, though.
Yeah, that's it. The issue number ones, although they are connected very clearly, especially through the the sequence that takes place in Powers of 10 number 1, where you see the immediate aftermath of what we saw in House of X. We know that this is all, one big story, or at least he's showing us that it's one big story, which is very interesting. One thing that I did notice, and this is one thing again that started conversation, not just who the strange tree man in the future is, but then also how does Charles somehow have telekinesis, which was also revealed in one of those panels. Very small. It was a very small, subtle moment. Mm-hmm. But he, the thumb drive that was stolen by the mutants at the, towards the end of House of X number 1, he's able to pull the thumb drive away from Mystique with his mind, which, knowing Charles, that's not something that he should be able to do. Is it related to his, sort of, Cerebro helmet or whatever he's wearing? Possibly. Or maybe that isn't the Charles Xavier that we know.
Right. Could it be that nothing is the same now?
Could it be that everybody's a clone?
All right. Tell us about House of X number 2.
So this is where, when I read this, I just basically, I threw it down, stared at a wall for a little bit, and picked it up and read it again.
Okay, I didn't go quite that far, but I'm also a DC guy. But yeah. I can appreciate my Marvel friends doing that, especially my X-Men Marvel friends doing that, because this was seismic.
Yeah, this is not something I would expect. Having read the X-Men books for the past
especially
years.
From an issue number 2.
Yeah, for a second issue. Although technically it's an issue number 3, but whatever. It says
not a number 1
on there. Yeah,
and it's not a final issue.
Exactly.
These were, I don't want to say gut punches, but these were revelations that are usually reserved for the beginning or the end of an arc.
Yeah. For him to not start with this is bold. It's a bold choice for a writer. And so what are we talking about? So we're talking about, and if you have the original cover, or one of the original covers of the reprints for House of X number 2, you'll notice that Moira McTaggart is front and center. And not just Moira, but Moira in various guises and designs. So what could that be about? Well, of course you open up and you have, a beautiful...
She's not a mutant.
Yes, you have. Why is she in there? Why is she so important? Well,
she's
you have this
ally,
beautiful...
but she's not a mutant. She's not an X-Man.
Yeah, until you read page 2. So page 1, it's this life of Moira McTaggart, and she kind of looks like Anne of Green Gables, and then she grows old and she dies. And you're like, nah, what? That's not right. And then page 2, she's reborn as a baby, back as herself again in the womb with all of her memories. Huh? That's page 2. Okay. This one does have a different artist than the previous two issues. So Pepe Larraz has the main duties on the interiors here. Again, Marte Gracia.
Fantastic art.
Oh, so far. So this is the thing. Even with some of the issues switching up artists, usually that's something that's really jarring and you don't want to see happen, especially in an event series like this. It's perfect. Like I have not been unhappy with this art at all. Usually, even when you're switching between artists and art styles, it can be kind of off-putting sometimes when there's some changes in the design. I don't feel that at all. And again, that's just my opinion. Some other people might have different takes on it, with like the different looks of the characters and the different styles of how they're presented. But it's impactful. They've gotten some really great pencilers and inkers here to make this work, to make the artwork worthy of the story and vice versa. So, very exciting. But the rest of this issue presents Moira telling the story, or possibly thinking the story at Charles, of what her life has been, what she's done. And you see her meeting with Charles Xavier, knowing everything she knew from her first life, playing with that as a scientist plays with things. So you see her interest in running experiments on not just other people, but her own life, because she knows how it should be going. She knows what should be happening. And, being able to take that knowledge and put it into making different decisions and changing her direction. And in her second life, she becomes a scientist that isolates the mutant gene and figures out a way to remove it. And that, unfortunately, introduces her to several what we would consider villains, Mystique, and I'm trying to think who the other character is. Destiny, that's right. Who blow up her lab and kill all of their fellow scientists, and basically threaten her. And Destiny knows that normal threats wouldn't work, because she knows that Moira is special. She is a mutant. She's separate from everything because she has this ability to reincarnate herself and basically have a do-over. And so Destiny pretty much lays it out to her. Don't do this. Don't pull this shit again, or we will erase you. You have so many lives left, and she throws out the number.
I love how she threw that at 10, maybe 11.
10, maybe 11 if things work out right, before somebody kills you as a baby. And she, Destiny tells her, it's like, hey, you might be reborn and getting a do-over, but guess what? Every Destiny in your timeline also knows everything about what you might do. So watch it, because I can hunt you down and kill you as a baby before your mutant power kicks in, and then you won't reincarnate anymore. And that kind of lights a fire in Moira's ass, figuratively as well as literally, because Pyro burns her alive. And at that point, she goes back to square one, becomes a scientist again, but this time, of course, falls in love with Charles, and that's where we get one of the best backhanded versions of comic book writer shade that I've read since Alan Moore wrote anything. And in this era where she becomes Charles's, partner, they have this great page where Hickman describes sort of what I would consider, or what most readers might consider, what they understand about the X-Men, what they've been reading in X-Men for a long time, since the beginning. And you see a couple different panels with some core members of the X-Men in their, iconic outfits. So the original students, the original X-Men from X-Men #1, how they looked there. You get the giant size X-Men #1 team. You get, and again, here's the shade, the Lost Decade, which is basically the last 10 years of X-Men, starting with AVX, where you have the X-Men as they were combined with Phoenix. He's basically throwing shade over the past 10 years of rocky sales and storytelling.
Sometimes shade isn't shade. Sometimes it's a tribute.
Nah, the lost decade.
I'm not making fun of you. I'm celebrating you.
I mean, hey, I read it through that whole time, and I liked quite a bit of it. I really enjoyed Bendis a lot. I know some people have different opinions. So, but yeah. And so in this era, of course, she describes that everything's great, but then everybody dies because the Sentinels come for everyone and kill them all. So she has to restart again. And, you know, there's a lot of it where there's continuous versions of this where she kind of goes through her different choices. She makes a different choice. She starts early and creates a mutant utopia, but then the Sentinels come and destroy that. And then she's like, oh, well, the Sentinels are the problem, so let's get rid of Trask. And so she goes and assassinates everybody in the Trask line, but then realizes that it's not just Trask. The thing was going to happen anyway. Somebody else came up with the Sentinels. Right. And, you know, then she's screwed again because the Sentinels come for her.
There's another timeline where she dies in a plane crash at 22 before she can do anything.
Oh, yeah, exactly. So that's just like
we go through a bunch. But it leads us to the 10th life, though.
Yes. And one thing to mention, too, I think it's her 9th life where she joins Apocalypse. And that's an interesting one, too, where...
That didn't work out too well.
Yeah, it didn't work out too well, but it's Apocalypse's, you know... She becomes a horseman. This is sort of like, you know, if Apocalypse were to take his mutant mastery of the world and keep going from there, like, this is what the future would hold. Of course, that ends poorly. And then it brings it to the current one, which is the 10th one. And that's where she encounters Charles, and we get basically the bookend, the panels that constitute the bookend of what we saw at the beginning of Powers of 10 number 1, which is the back and forth Charles and Moira looking at each other before Charles reads Moira's mind. Very interesting. And of course there are, you know, because it's Hickman, we get some great infographics. The Many Lives of Moira X, which presents all the timelines, every single timeline, 1 through 10, except for 6. We don't know what happened to 6. And of course, you know, if you follow them, it's multiple pages. If you follow them towards the end, you'll notice that number 9 and number 10 are incomplete. Mm-hmm. So, and apparently there were some typos around here. So if you have a first edition or first printing, congratulations, you have typos where some of the events are kind of switched around. But that's fine. Read Hickman's Twitter, he fixes it for you.
Well, I think this book is in running for single issue of the year.
Oh,
without a doubt. I love the concept of a minor character actually having major implications upon a big franchise. The speculator market has already proven that to be the case because 96, Moira's first appearance in the X-Men was very early on in the Claremont run. Mm-hmm. In Uncanny number 96. Prices on that are exploding. I'm very happy to see her written normally, though, because I still carry that Claremont Amagona, you know, the you know, with the Scottish accent, you know, oh begosh and begorra. I mean, it was like really hard to, just like Banshee, it was really hard to read her.
Oh yeah, she I think she was always written. She never said the word out ever. It was always oot. She basically sounded like Groundskeeper Willie in my head.
Right. You know, I don't want to say she was a minor character because factors in a big way to certain big characters, you know, most notably Charles in Wolfsbane.
Mm-hmm. And Proteus.
And Proteus,
yeah. Son. So.
Yeah. Oh, Jesus. Like I said, need Wikipedia. Mm-hmm. I love this Molotov cocktail thrown into the mix where it's going to challenge any sense of continuity you had. Mm-hmm. And where things fit in. And I know people are like bitching of like, well, where does this fit in the Marvel universe right now? You know, all that shit. Let the story play out.
Exactly.
You know, come on. You don't think they've thought about this? Come on.
Yeah, Hickman doesn't do anything by half measures. So you know that he has an answer there. He just hasn't revealed it yet. Maybe he won't ever reveal it. Maybe he'll just, you know, piss everybody off and say like, well, I know, but you'll have to figure it out yourself. Or it's going to be very obvious. Either way, I think this is masterful storytelling as is. And who knows? Maybe the era of X-Men or the understanding of X-Men, the current continuity that we've had up to this point, maybe that's her sixth life, and that's why it's blank. Who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, that could be the secret. So the next issue, of course, following down that list, is Powers of 10 number 2. Oh, was there anything else that you liked about this book?
No, nothing else I liked about this book. No.
Yeah. It was crap other than
As
that.
I said, I didn't have the visceral reaction you had of reading it and then putting it down and rereading it, but even I can recognize when there's a very bold and game-changing development, and this was one of them.
This definitely...
X-Men universe is not the same after House of X number 2.
Exactly. Yeah. If you never read another issue of X-Men again, read House of X number 2. And then throw down disgust because everything you've read before means nothing. Yeah. So I thought it was great. I actually had, a side note, I had a conversation with my husband right after reading it, and he looked at me and he's like, I really fucking hate it when they keep rebooting things. And I was like, I tried to explain to him, no, they don't reboot it. It's not rebooting anything. It's just changing our understanding of how, of how the narrative has actually progressed this entire time over the past 50 years. He's like, I don't get the difference. It's still rebooting.
And the best thing about this, I think, is it gives us an opportunity to clean some of the clutter.
Mm-hmm.
People have very different views about what is clutter. For me, it's the notion that Magneto and Gabriel Heller have this connection to World War II, yet they're maybe 52. That's one thing I'd love to see play out, where there's some realignment where it's a continuity narrative that makes sense.
Yeah.
And a lot of that with the future characters that go back and forth. I mean, Jesus, Rachel Summers, what a headache. I can't follow her story at all.
Well, it keeps flipping back and forth because, well, it's a future timeline that's been erased, but it actually hasn't been erased, and they go back there sometimes, and it's
and especially with X-Men, with some of their strongest storylines involving the future and the impact of future characters on the past.
I mean, some of the biggest ones, Cable and Bishop.
I'll be interested to see what's going on, especially in year 100, how that relates to year 10. Because there's connective tissue.
Well, it's funny that you should mention that, because we are going to get to Powers of 10 number 3, but first we got to do number 2.
Okay.
So, this one, too, for Powers of 10 number 2, it jumps right into basically the setup, where they go to find Island M, which of course is, I think it's Krakoa. It shouldn't be Krakoa, where Magneto has been hiding this whole time. This is again back at year 0, so this is before the X-Men have been formed by Xavier and now Moira as well. It's basically him making peace with Magneto and saying, you know what, after everything that Moira's shown me, and here, let me show you what Moira's shown me, our decisions individually, my path, your path, none of that works, because we've done it, or Moira's done it anyway. But what we're going to do, we're going to say, fuck all that, we're throwing out the rules, almost literally, he says, you know what, we're changing the rules up. Let's join our forces and make this thing work. And that then, of course, leads into the current era, where we've got the island of Krakoa, we've got Cerebro-headed Charles Xavier, and of course we've got Magneto all working together for what we assume is a common goal of independence and not necessarily supremacy, but sort of, safety, I guess, on Earth. For the manifest destiny, and they do mention that manifest destiny of the mutants being the inevitable future of humanity. Of course, they also find out that the humans, or at least a cabal of humans, have created a master mold space station out near the sun, and this is the Project Orcus that was revealed in the first issue. Cyclops, of course, is like, I'm going to go ahead, this makes sense, I'm going to lead a team out there, we're going to take care of this. and that's where we leave that. We also go back to the 100 years in the future with the aftermath of the return of Rasputin and what is it? Oh my gosh, I've forgotten. Cardinal. There we go. With Rasputin and Cardinal back to Krakoa, which is now an asteroid floating around Earth, to reveal what they've actually stolen. They also reveal who's actually leading the X-Men at this point, which happens to be Apocalypse. Big change, big turn. He's the leader that they mentioned in the first issue of Powers of 10. That this whole time they've been working with Apocalypse in the future. So I
gotta say, what you see there are 4 pretty laid back horsemen.
Yeah, if these are the horsemen, they're kind of like whatever.
They're kind of chill.
Yeah, and they don't even look like horsemen. They're not, painted blue or looking extra, armored up and tragic. Like, they look pretty normal to me.
Though in the narrative material, it's abundantly clear they are horsemen.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and of course, there's 4 of them plus Cardinal and Rasputin. But they reveal what they've stolen from Earth, and it is an index. So they're going to go ahead and try and figure out how to use this index to get the information that they need. What that information is, we're not sure yet. I'm sure that'll be revealed over time. And of course, we do flash back to Nimrod and his reaction to the break-in. And you also see how Nimrod, again, how he completely dismisses humanity. He doesn't really give a shit. This man-machine alliance is just convenient for him. His sarcasm is yet again on display, while he just completely annihilates 2 humans. just because he can. While he tries to figure out, of course, what the mutants were up to when they were breaking in and stealing something. This is also where Tree Man is revealed, who the actual Tree Man is. And if you guessed that it was basically Cypher combined with Krakoa, well, you get a cookie, because I don't think anybody saw that one coming. So no Black Tom, no like Groot mutant. It's actually Doug and Krakoa. It's pretty cool. He's basically going to be figuring out through the index how to find the information that they're looking for. Zorn is revealed as even extra nihilist. I mean, he's always been kind of nihilist, or at least concerned about his effect on the world around him, because of course he is has a black hole for a face. But he's just extra depressing now as a horseman in the future. And it's trying to set up a potential plan, like a potential direction for what's happening in this 100-year mark. And then, of course, it changes gears again, and we get the 1,000-year in the future. What happens there? And it's the description of the Nimbus, which is a world mind that the future inhabitants of Earth have created to attract the intelligence, attract other intelligences out there in the universe. And of course, they succeed. And this is where we're introduced basically to the Phalanx, who are, as is further explained in the very useful, I don't know what to call it. It's not an encyclopedia entry, an index,
back matter. Let's just call
back it matter. It's not even back matter. It's intra back matter, because it happens in the middle of the story. That the Phalanx is kind of like a super hyper advanced version of civilization, that it goes well beyond, minor individuals, and actually is sort of like a super mind that lives, to control the universe at a galactic level. And one of the things that it does mention when it talks to the different various versions of societies is that the Phalanx have the ability to provide ascension. And this is what the future inhabitants at the 1,000-year mark, that's what they want. They want the Phalanx to give them ascension. And they've created this world mind, the Nimbus, as sort of a way to attract them and to show them that they're worthy of it. So that's where that leaves us at the end of the issue. Huge impact. You're like, oh, okay, well, 1,000 years in the future, we're all going to be, ascended into energy beings, maybe? Or are they going to war with the Phalanx? Is there a plan for this? Like, is there something else that they want from the Phalanx that might, create this another hyper advanced mutant kind? Who knows? Maybe we'll find out in number 3.
Mm-hmm.
Who did the art for this one? This one, again, I think we are back.
I think we were
to
back
RB Silva.
Yeah, it's RB Silva, yep.
RB Silva and Adriana De Benedetto. So again, it's great, consistent art, beautiful colors, wonderful, just beautiful work altogether. I think the design of it is pretty cool, especially when you get 1,000 years in the future and you see sort of how the Phalanx are being shown. They look like ink blots, basically, that are sort of coming together. You have the beautiful image of these future X-Men and the current X-Men. There's lots of different color schemes that are going on. They're very distinct. It's really cool. Really cool. What about you? What are your feelings?
I feel like I'm hardly contributing to this episode because your descriptions are so wonderful.
Or I just talk too much. You gotta stop me.
Yeah. Well, obviously, there's a lot of love that you have for this franchise, and when you see the franchise treated well, I think this comic is where the conventional storytelling somewhat kicks in. Even though that's happening, it still provides enough that you're pondering and you're speculating, and that's what a lot of really well-constructed comics do that are part of an overarching storyline. I basically just echo everything you said there. I do have a question, though, and because of the DCBS schedule and some other things, I was dependent upon the kindness of strangers for digital codes to read these books. I assume you read them in the paper form.
Yeah.
Okay. Throughout most of the issues, 1, 2 of both, I don't think it was in 3 of Powers of 10-3, there was the Stan soapbox from 1968.
Yep, they had that. Yeah.
Within the story.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, it's just, they, that's the thing. If you're reading these paper copies, there are advertisements mixed in. So it is not without ads in the middle of the story. So.
Since that was part of the digital component, I'm wondering what's written there, if that has an impact.
That's a good question.
And I haven't seen too much speculation about that, but it seems that the inclusion of that in the digital versions, without being disruptive to the storyline, I think there may be something there. And again, the Stan soapbox from 1968 was a plea for basically racial unity, which I think you can also extend to gay and lesbian people and even the women's movement, given the time that came out. And I haven't seen much speculation about that online, but it seems that its inclusion in the digital versions seems very much deliberate.
And but I've actually seen it in other, the few other Marvel books that I do get, that they include the Stan soapbox, so I don't really think about it as much. I see it when I'm reading Runaways, I see it if I'm picking up another book, but the fact that it's in the digital copy, I'm not aware because I don't read them digitally, so maybe they're not present in other digital copies, but in this series they are. And
then also I was wondering if you knew anybody who got the digital director's cut for issue number 1.
Oh gosh, no.
I don't know anyone who got that, so I'm really wondering what's in there too. That'll definitely be a 99-cent grab.
Oh yeah,
stuff goes on sale.
Well, I know he did have some corrections, some very minor corrections with the printed Krakoan language that he came up with.
Okay.
I think there was.
Yeah, we would have spotted that.
Yeah. Well, he mixed up H and G. I think in the first issue, he was like, oops, typo, G and H have been switched. And then also, like I mentioned in Powers number 1, there was some times switched around in one of Moira's timelines that kind of made it a little bit more confusing. But I think when they went digitally, it's a lot easier to fix that than going to another printing. But of course, all these are getting multiple printings because they're selling out like crazy.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's go to the last issue, the most recent one that's been released, and that's Powers of 10 number 3.
Okay. Well, like you said, last issue, Powers of 10 number 2, was a little bit more story, so a little bit more to move the story along. No huge revelations, but he did answer some minor questions. So he answered who the tree person was that raised a lot of debate when issue 1 came out. He answered a question on who the big man was, who the leader was 100 years in the future. Certain things like that, or the possible motivations, or at least created the possible motivations of the people in the year 1000, like what their tract was, what their trajectory was. And I think in Powers number 3, he continues that. So he's answering some questions and creating some other ones. And of course, this one, I guess you could say, rearranged in at least my mind what I was reading. It was unexpected. And again, for the middle of the series, it doesn't change the climax, but it changes where I put it in the series. So this one, let me look at who. R.B. Silva also drew this one. So R.B. Silva on pencils and inks or digital, and Marte Gracia again for the color. This one starts out, of course, sort of continuing from the 100-year storyline, showing us this future, this year of the Man-Machine Alliance, where we're pretty much made very clear that the Man-Machine Alliance is not so much of an alliance as the machines are in charge and humanity is told that they're weak and imperfect and need machine in them through this interesting sanctuary or church ceremony where they're quote-unquote christening a baby by burning off half of his face and replacing it with, I guess, nanotech. Exciting, it's just like going to christening now. But of course,
that creepy?
It was so creepy, so weird.
Creepy.
Like, it was such a great introduction to this society. It's like, oh, so humanity is basically just, they know they're trash. Like, this is the future of letting the machines, become, putting the machines in charge just basically uses them as fodder. And of course, we've seen how little Nimrod cares about people. They're weak, they're unimpressive, and really only just kind of keeps them around so we can make fun of them or burn them alive. And of course, we see the X-Men, or the current 100-year X-Men, Zorn, Rasputin, Cardinal, and Magneto appear at the church to start some shit, which is great. We get more infographics, sort of giving us the, who the surviving mutants on Earth are. There's a little bit of a question here. Mother appears in this little list. So you have the different characters. You've got Apocalypse, you've got Wolverine, Zorn, North, who is Dane and Frost. I'm not too sure who North is, because I don't know if they've shown them. But of course, Krakoa / Cypher is there. And then of course we have Rasputin and Cardinal. Percival and Silo Bell were the two mutants who were killed off in the first issue. And then there's Mother, Akaba, mutant, pureblood. Who is Mother? Who could this possibly be? We don't know at this point. But of course we get some conversation between Nimrod and Karima, who is saying, hey, we got to go and stop these mutants. And Nimrod's like, who cares? I don't really care. And she shows up with a bunch of Sentinels to, of course, crush their little incursion. Meanwhile, Wolverine and Apocalypse are where they need to be. They've used the index to find where to go, to find what little bit of information they have. And what that information is Nimrod's, the date of Nimrod being turned on. Whenever we have X-Men and we have exact dates of things, clearly something time travel-y possibly might be going on. Nimrod, of course, finds out that they're there in the Citadel and decides, okay, I'm gonna do something about it now. I'm actually going to take some action. Meanwhile, of course, you've got Rasputin, you've got Zorn, and you've got Karima standing off. Rasputin says, hey, this Zorn guy, if I take off his mask, we've got a black hole. Karima, says, whatever, you haven't seen what's in a black hole. And Rasputin's like, yeah, you're right. I'm gonna call your bluff. Black hole time! And takes off Zorn's mask and totally creates unleashes a singularity in the middle of Earth. Potentially destroying everything around it. Meanwhile, Apocalypse and Wolverine try to hold off Nimrod and his Nimrod clones before Wolverine takes the information and goes back to Krakoa, where we find that Moira McTaggart is still alive and has been kept alive in the sarcophagus. Is she Mother? Possibly. She might be, their version of Akaba, their version of Mother. Maybe it's somebody else. We don't know. I'm thinking that that's her. But he takes the knowledge crystal, plugs it into her chest, and she has now all the information that she needs before he, quote-unquote, sends her on her way by killing her, ending her life. And the last line is, so ended the 9th life of Moira X, which means that the 100 years in the future timeline that we've been reading in Powers of X and Powers of 10 and House of X is actually the 9th timeline and is not the same timeline as the current history X-Men in year 10, or potentially even the 1,000 years in the future X-Men timeline. So this one, that's it. I guess we're done with it.
Yeah.
We're done with 100 years in the future, or at least this version of 100 years in the future.
Mm-hmm.
It's over. Because guess what? That's in the past, because now we're in Moira's 10th life, we know.
Mm-hmm.
So, crazy. And of course we do have the Moira timeline has been revised. We do get to see all of Life 9, with all of the years basically filled in on that 9th timeline. So, very interesting stuff. And then we see that she dies in year 123 or 123 years after her birth.
Mm-hmm.
After receiving Nimrod's origin files, and that's where we start over with year 10, or with life number 10, which is what's going on in the current 10-year timeline.
Which, at the time of recording, we are 1 week away from.
Exactly.
So I think actually for an episode that was intended to be the halfway point, but we've had such hard times getting together, this sounds like a really good spot to break in. So.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
almost halfway point.
I'm so excited with this. Sure. The fact that he basically has been building up this confrontation between, the 100-year X-Men and Nimrod and what's going on there, and
in a short period of time.
Yeah, in a short period of time.
In a very short period of time, but
really, I think they've appeared in maybe 4 issues, 3 issues, 4 issues, and now they're gone. They're done. Possibly. I mean, he might come back to them, but they're done. Like that timeline, that's in the past.
We're done.
So that shocked me,
because
that changed how I then saw all the other information that we've seen in the different eras. I'm very excited for House of X next week. House of X number 3, because this is one of those. This is the time where it kind of doubles up on a few issues. So last week was Powers of 10 number 2. This week is Powers of 10 number 3, and next week is House of X number 3. And then it'll be, I think, House again after that.
And this runs to October 9th, which conveniently is when New York Comic Con takes place.
Huh, interesting.
Interesting.
I wonder if there's going to be an announcement or something.
Could be.
Because at that point, we would have been...
Again, we already have the solicits for what the X line is going to be. But
exactly.
We don't know everything. We don't know everything.
Yeah.
All right, well, we're going to stick just to this because we thought it was an important enough event to dedicate one episode to it. I really wish Brother Brian had been with us, knowing his X-Men fandom, but he's traveling for work, and you just couldn't get him on the horn for this one, but hopefully we'll get him for the wrap-up. I would love to have that. So we're going to wrap this episode up, and when we wrap an episode of the Comic Book Bears podcast up, we do so with a segment called the Wolves of the Week segment, where we spotlight something, be it a comic book or a film or a charitable initiative, anything under the sun that we think you, fair listener, may be interested in sampling. I know you're kind of talked out, Steve, but I'm just going with tradition. I'll start with you. What is your Wolf of the Week?
Well, my Wolf of the Week is the sketch show on HBO called A Black Lady Sketch Show. It is absolutely one of the funniest things on TV right now. It's been going, I think it started about 3 weeks ago, so this would be the 4th week. It has been a laugh riot every single week. These women are hilarious. They're great writers. You may have seen them in other places before. Basically, the head writer and / creator of the show is Robin Thede, who, if you watch BET, you may have remembered she had a show called The Rundown last year, which is a combination of sort of, news informative with sketches, kind of like a Full Frontal with Samantha Bee.
It sounded to me like a Daily Show the way you.
Yeah, it's kind of like a Daily Show, kind of like a Full Frontal. It's in that same format, presenting.
There's not a lot of daylight between Full Frontal and the Daily Show, so I don't think we have to go into that in detail.
Very true. But unfortunately, it did not do well. It didn't really find a huge audience there. But thankfully, it found the right type of audience, which was somebody at HBO who said, "This is amazing. Let's give this woman a show." I'm sure she pitched it as well, but it's her. It is Ashley Nicole Black. Speaking of Full Frontal, she was one of the main writers on Full Frontal with Samantha Bee until recently. You've also got Quinta Brunson, who you might remember from BuzzFeed. She was a frequent contributor to the BuzzFeed stable of videos. And then also Gabrielle Dennis, who I'm less familiar with, but she is just equally hilarious with the rest of these women. Their sketches are great. And you do not have to be a black lady to appreciate the humor. It's actually very queer positive. There's a lot of queer based type humor in there as well. Last week, Bob the Drag Queen hosted the Basic Ball, which if you're a fan of Pose, you might be familiar with the ball scene. This basically took a bunch of people doing regular things like running errands is, the category is running errands. She's got all the receipts and she knows the store's return policy. She will not accept store credit. Just amazing stuff. That's so ridiculously silly and very consistently good. So I recommend it. A Black Lady Sketch Show. It's on Fridays on HBO. Watch it if you can.
All right, well, my Wolf of the Week goes to a film that did not get a very positive response, both from critics and in terms of the box office. But I do think while it is a flawed film, there's enough there to recommend it, certainly as my Wolf of the Week. And that's the adaptation of The Kitchen, which is based on a Vertigo comic book series of the same name by Ollie Masters and Ming Doyle. The Kitchen stars Melissa McCarthy, Tiffany Haddish, and Elizabeth Moss. And the kitchen that is referred to in the title is Hell's Kitchen, circa 1978. And we see these three women. They are married to members of the Irish mob. One night while robbing a convenience store, they get busted, and through a series of events, these three women end up running the collection and other mob-related activities in their area. I'm not the biggest fan of Elizabeth Moss, but you did get to see all three of her facial expressions if you're into her. But I have to say Melissa McCarthy and Tiffany Haddish, they are wonderful in this film. And they are not actresses known for dramatic parts, but they acquit themselves very, very nicely. Again, there are a lot of flaws. The plot is somewhat convoluted. There's some genuine surprises and some things you see coming from a mile away, but hey, there's only one Scorsese. I also really liked the look of the film. It gave you that sense of washed out, gritty New York in the late 70s without going for that cinematography trick of actually using the 70s film filters. And unfortunately, as I said, the box office is really lousy. So by the time you're listening to this podcast, it may actually be out of theaters at this point. I know by me, there were no listings beyond Thursday night. So if it's reserved for Netflix and chill down the road or a Redbox rental or whatever, do keep an eye out for The Kitchen from New Line Cinema. And the director is, I think I need to mention her because it was a very well-directed film, and that's Andrea Berloff. And this turns out to be her directorial debut. So again, The Kitchen is my Wolf of the Week. All right, wrapping it up for real now. Again, we are the Comic Book Bears podcast. You can find us on the Twitter and the Tumblr and the Instagram as Comic Book Bears. You can find us on the Facebook as Comic Book Bears Podcast. If you want to reach out to us, you can do so by sending an email to comicbookbears@gmail.com. And if you want to listen to us, you can download us through iTunes. You can listen to us through Stitcher Radio, and you can catch us on some of the other podcatching platforms. Until next time, I'm Billy Z.
And I'm Steve Morey.
You're going to hear Wolf and an Explosion. We'll be back real soon. Take care, everyone.
Wolf!
Our house is a very, very, very fine house with 2 cats in the yard. Life used to be so hard. Now everything is easy 'cause of you. And now, la 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 Our house is a very, very, very fine house with 2 cats in the yard. Life used to be so hard. Now everything is easy 'cause of you. And now I'll light the fire while you place the flowers in the vase that you bought today.